Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I have the special honor of welcoming not one, not two, but three former top diplomats from Europe. I've got with me from west to east Ambassador José Zorilla of Spain, Ambassador Jean-Daniel Ruch of Switzerland, and Ambassador Sandor Kusai of Hungary. The four of us want to discuss the precarious state of diplomacy on Eurasia's western peninsula. So, gentlemen, welcome.
Welcome. Pleasure being there.
Thank you to all of you for taking the time, because I think we're going through a very special moment, actually, in global politics and diplomacy. We've just witnessed the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in the East. We've watched the efforts toward peace in Ukraine in the West, but we've also seen how European states rushed to Washington in order to make sure that it doesn't happen as soon as it could. I would like to get all of your take first on what you think is currently happening in global politics and diplomacy, and maybe we start with José Zorilla.
Thank you very much, Pascual. Thank you. Well, I think we have reached a tipping point. I think up to now we were, seeing the attempt of the United States to keep it, an hegemony of sorts in world affairs. And right now it is clear that China has reached the point in which it can claim it's not very far away from the United States, or else even perhaps more. The balance is right now very even. It's not like it used to be clear hegemonic American world. I think we have to take account. The People's Republic of China. I think the parade has been a very important event. And if there were any doubts concerning the degree of isolation of Putin, I think they are, quite frankly, have been destroyed by the presence of all these different countries behind China and Russia. It's no longer, Russia is not isolated. Probably Donald Trump is more isolated in the White House, not invited to the parade, And then, remember, India plus China is something like 3.2 billion people, It's an impressive percentage. And the United States cannot ignore that. And there has been, besides that, there has been a very important technological breakthrough. China has discovered and put on the market a 6J. We are in a meager 4J, and they're in a 6, 5,000 times as fast as the 4J. Pascal, the world is not what it used to be, It is not what it used to be.
Jean-Daniel, do you agree? And how do you see especially the event in China that happened this week?
Yeah, thank you very much. I fully agree. I think we are living a period of fundamental change, which is the end of the world order, which has been established by the Western powers, I would even say after the First World War, and then under American influence after the Second World War. The three pillars of this world power were international law, the UN, was freedom of trade, the GATT, and then the WTO, and the Security Council as sort of the guarantor of the system. Now, all of these three things are being, is the right word, maybe destroyed is the right word. And there are also economic reasons for that. That's what I would like to point at. In 1945, the United States were the factory of the world, and that's why they needed rules of freedom of trade, so abolishing trade barriers. And today, China is the factory of the world. So we see that China is taking the lead in trying to create new principles, or even to push for those principles established in 1945. I mean, it's fascinating to see that the country which is speaking about international law, multilateralism, a multipolar world order, but also freedom of trade, is not the West, even though these were the principles which were very much the core of the liberal democratic values. But now these principles are being promoted by a country like China. What I find a bit sad, and this is something we may talk about later, is that it was a Eurasian summit in Shanghai without Europe. So the first 3 letters were not there, except for a few exceptions. But I believe that if Europe wants to find a stature and a role in the world of tomorrow, they have to revise fundamentally their attitudes towards the big powers in the East.
Do you think that is possible, Sandor? Like, when you look at this and the absence of Europe from a Eurasian meeting, and of course the absence of a Eurasian thinking from the European foreign policy, how do you think that? I mean, you're in Hungary, and Hungary has had a different role in the last couple of years. Do you think there's a realignment going to happen?
I think sooner or later there will be a realignment, but for that we need a fundamental change in the concepts, in the thinking, and in the personalities of the European leadership. This set of principles, this set of diplomatic practice and foreign policy practice is not capable. And of course, those persons also are not capable to implement anything else. But if you allow me, I want to add one more idea to our discussion. I fully agree with my 2 colleagues' assessment from the global world order point of view. I think it's very important to understand that these meetings in China and the meeting which happened yesterday in Europe, in Paris, formulate or close a very important phase also in the European situation, namely in the Ukraine war, which means that we were at a crossroad since Representative Witkoff's last visit to Moscow. We had the Witkoff visit, then the Alaska meeting of the summit of China, of Russia and the US, then the Washington meeting with the Europeans and Ukrainians. Then we had the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting and the celebrations in Beijing. So what we see now, that was the possibility to change course from war to peaceful negotiated settlement. We had such situations during this war 3 or 4 times already. But the choice of some important players was to continue the war. And this time it was also a possibility to switch the road to a peaceful negotiated settlement. I have the feeling that we passed that crossroad moment, and now we are heading again towards the continuation of the war. President Trump was not able to press a peaceful solution, neither on Russia nor on Europe. So we continue to move in a war setting, and the war will be continued for the foreseeable future until we reach a point again, a new crossroad, where there will be a possibility to switch the road to a peaceful solution. But for us to reach that point, we need further war actions and further destruction and death. That's the sorry thing. I agree with the global aspect, but we shall, as we are a neighboring country in Hungary of Ukraine, so we shall always see the immediate effects. And I think the immediate effect was that the possibility for a short, fast, peaceful, negotiated solution has been lost. That's the situation.
That's a very sad outlook, but I need to ask you, because all 3 of you were practitioners in the past. You've all served as ambassadors in different countries, and you've all been career diplomats. So you've gone through the different ranks and the route. An assessment of yours, which the three of you share, which I share. How prevalent do you think this assessment is among the diplomats, the current generation of diplomats in Europe? Jose, you are the one who told me, Pascal, we all knew it was just a speech act. Jose, do you think that that's also true about the current situation?
Well, the point of view of a practitioner is different from the point of view of the common law, people who don't know anything about foreign policy, which is very, very restricted field of knowledge. It's something like, operating a brain tube or something like that. It's not very, is logically speaking, it's a very specialized field of knowledge. Not many people know about it. But it is quite clear that war was in the horizon. Remember the Minsk agreement. Finally, Hollande and Angela Merkel acknowledged they created Minsk to fool Russia and give Ukraine time to rearm or arm. Therefore, they knew that the purpose of all this was war. This is very elementary, and we all know that there was an invasion, there was a peace treaty, it was a peace signed with initials. And Putin said, do not join NATO, I will withdraw from the territories. I am not interested in land. All I want is that you don't join NATO. And they said, yes, no problem. We will do it. They signed. And then came the United States and Johnson, and they both said, no, you have to go to war because the critical question is NATO. And war continues because, Russia will never allow Ukraine inside NATO. There's no way. And Zelensky cannot go to a peace process because they will kill him. Parubi recently passed away. Parubi is the one who said to Zelensky, as soon as he won the election, he said, if Zelensky wishes to go to a peace process like the one he promised in his electoral campaign, he will be hanged in a tree in the Cresciatu Avenue. It's self-evident that we cannot go to a peace process, whereas, of course, Putin, after so many casualties, cannot go to war, cannot go to peace, accepting the Ukraine created by the coup of 2014. Therefore, the positions are very wide apart, and we all know it, but the political discourse is different. The second level is a different story. For instance, in Europe, the second level is advising the top level not to sanction Russia anymore, because the sanctions affect us more than they affect Russia. To no avail, because this political class is intent on putting sanctions on Russia, which of course have no effect. Worse, they affect us, because sanctioning means we are not going to buy from you gas or oil. Good. He will sell it to India. India will sell it to us. Period. But we have to buy the oil and gas more expensive. 4 years, Germany has been the past 4 years in recession. 4 years. All this due to that. And since they don't want to go back, as Kusai, as Sandor said, they don't want to go back and do something different, which is what they had to do. They should do this, but they don't want to do it. Just to give you an example, 2 well-known intellectuals, Kisore Mapubani and Stephen Ward, Harvard professor. They said, go to the BRICS, start negotiating with Russia, and sign a good treaty with China. We are doing exactly the opposite. So this has nothing to do with diplomats or negotiating technique. There is, a clear strategic decision up there to go on fighting because they want to bleed Russia. That's all. And they continue. And right now they are beginning again in the Caucasus with Azerbaijan.
Yes.
Azerbaijan has said that we were the master and subjugated by Russia in the north, and we have to remember, everybody, that the true territory of Azerbaijan continues in Iran. So Azerbaijan sees itself as a double sword, one against Russia and the other against Iran. This is clearly pushed by the Anglo-Saxon axe. This is by London and Washington. So they have not stopped. They have. You remember the old movies, when the Indians didn't speak very well English, and they said, "White man speaks with two tongues, like a snake." Yeah, they want this, but they don't want this.
That's the Western hypocrisy. But the question to me is, like, in the media and in the polite society, saying things like this is not the good tone. It's not the good thing to do. But diplomatic professionals like you, do you think there is an understanding that this is a dead end? Like Jean Daniel, like, how do you think in Switzerland, in the Swiss diplomatic corps, what do you think the actual discussions are about? Is it ideological, dogmatic, or is there pragmatism on the ground that just doesn't bubble up?
A general comment is that I believe that foreign policy over the past 30 years has been less and less determined by diplomats, by foreign policy experts, and more by the intelligence, by the security structures in all of our countries. They are giving the tone. And I would even say that there is a very effective ecosystem which has been built, having some industries which are profiting, investing into media, investing into think tanks, who then reproduce the dominating narrative, which is, in the case of Russia, Russia wants to invade Europe, Putin equals Hitler, equals evil, we cannot negotiate with evil. And that feeds, I think, into this propaganda. Now, you would say that diplomats should be the ones who can resist this propaganda. My experience is that there is a shortage of memory in most Western diplomatic services. From all the discussions I have had, even recently when I was ambassador in Turkey, while those negotiations were taking place, I was meeting French and German diplomats who were telling me, we cannot accept a negotiated settlement. We must win that war. Ukraine must win that war with our support. And when I was asking them, what is the measurement of victory? Do you want to have Leclerc or Leopard tanks parading on the Red Square? Is that how do you measure victory? Then they just didn't know. The point I'm trying to make is that the war did not even start in 2014. The shortage of memory is much deeper. I do believe that what we see now is the result of how we missed to integrate Russia in the 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union. And I had the privilege to serve in the OSCE in Vienna in the mid-90s, with the Swiss presidency in 96. And the Russians, who were weak, were desperately trying to tell the West, please integrate us. Let's have a security treaty for Europe. Let's have a Security Council for Europe, where we would be treated as equal partners. Well, we know that the West gave some sort of lip service in politically binding but largely irrelevant document like the European Security Charter, which was approved within the context of the OSCE in 1999. But the Russians felt, okay, we will never be taken seriously by the West, and then they started to rearm, and then Ukraine happened, first Georgia, and then Ukraine. So I think where we were wrong, where the West was wrong, is that they should have consolidated the alliance with Russia in the 90s and extending the arm to the defeated party during the Cold War to integrate it. And then from the moment where the Russians where Putin came to power, he understood that this would never happen, and that the only way to regain respect and play the role that Russia believes they have to play in world history was through rearming, through reorganizing the society and the economy, and then by showing strength and showing force. So the failure goes back in the 90s. Are there many people who are aware about that? No. Even in our diplomatic services, the memory is way too short. At least in ours, I can certainly tell that. And therefore, everybody is sort of accepting the dominant narrative, which is Russia is evil and China is a huge threat to the West. We had recently our yearly report of the intelligence services, which was released. It could have been written by the RAND Corporation, or how come China comes 82 times in this report and always as a threat? Come on, China is not about to invade Switzerland. This is ridiculous. Quite the opposite. We need China as a trading partner, even more so after the 39% customs tariffs we have received from Trump. Thank you very much. But this shows first the impact of this military security policy thinking on our government policies, and it shows the importance that has taken these parts of the administrations in defining our security and foreign policy and in influencing the public opinion. There is a sort of small reaction, but not very strong indeed, to this way of thinking. And I think it's first and foremost a way of thinking. I would like to add one more thing maybe to what Jose said. I was a little bit part of these talks in Turkey between Ukraine and Russia back in March and April 2022, because one of the central concepts for Ukraine was the neutrality of Ukraine. And what struck me is that nobody really knew how to deal with the issue of disarmament and security guarantees. And even today, nobody has really a good formula for providing security guarantees to Ukraine. And nobody is putting on the agenda what seems to me obvious, which is that we have to go back to arms control. We have to go back to discussions about reduction in conventional forces in Europe, as we had in the 80s during the Cold War. And even today, the nuclear regime, let's say, is based only on one agreement left, which will come to an end in January 2026. And what worries me a lot is not only nobody is talking about the importance of reviving these discussions with the Russians, of course, and possibly with the Chinese also, but quite the opposite. Europe and all European countries know huge public debt, and they are ready to even increase this debt to do what? To buy more weapons, to rearm more, and mostly also to pay the Americans for the security by buying weapons. So I don't mind creating some kind of military balance in Europe. Maybe that can be conducive to peace according to theories of international relations that you know better than I do. But I think a smart policy would be to say we're going to rearm, but at the same time, we want to restart a meaningful and sound arms control negotiations, both conventional and nuclear.
And confidence building measures. Sandor, like from your experience, didn't we see over the last 30 years actually a regression of statecraft in Europe? Maybe you can react to what you heard.
I think Europe is in the process of statecraft as a philosophical or practical political category disappearing. That's what really happens. Statecraft means a kind of strategic thinking about your country, about your state, about how to manage affairs inside the country, internal politics, economics, and so on. And of course, an important part of it is foreign policy or diplomacy. That's also part of the statecraft. And what we see now is a degradation, and it is a degradation speeded up by time of the European statecraft, of the European diplomacy. If you allow me, I would like to react to my colleagues a little bit. First of all, I am convinced that the best diplomats in Europe, I knew in my times quite a few of them, understand these processes. They know that. But as Jose said, on the second layer, on the level of top diplomats, ambassadors, heads of departments within ministries, and so on, they understand it, but they are not. They do not have the influence for the political decision making. And I agree with Jean-Daniel on that it is totally shifted into the security apparatus, influencing the political decision making, and of course the leaders of Europe playing for the next day of their public opinion polls. They don't have the strategic vision anymore. Everybody plays to the next day only. For example, I just give you one example. Recently there are talks about France or Great Britain turning to the IMF for loans. I think their financial situation is not so bad to do that. It does not require that. But it would be easier for the French government or the British government to cut social expenses, but they cannot do it because they are unpopular back home. So they use a possible IMF deal. IMF will, for sure, prescribe social austerity, and they can say in Paris, oh guys, it is not our policy, it is forced upon us by IMF. So the political elite can switch out from the social tension or go around it. And the same happens in diplomacy. And one more final idea. I think we know, everybody who does the analysis, and on the level of the diplomacy, professional diplomacy, top level, there are still talented people. But the problem is that we lost not only the personal memories. The generation is a new generation who didn't practice diplomacy during the Cold War or just after the Cold War. The new people are all of them grew up during the 90s. So they have different personal memories about our profession and foreign policy. But the biggest problem is that we have lost the institutional memory as well. I can tell you that before I left the Hungarian diplomatic service, everybody looked at me very strangely when I suggested that when a question, a new situation, anything appears, I always suggested, guys, go to the archives, look up what we did, what was the situation in the similar cases, in the similar situations, and then discuss it, then make proposals for the leadership. They thought that I am fooled. Everybody thinks that the past is just for the past. History is not the teacher of the present. They think that it is an outdated idea. And one last element. All of my colleagues talked about the missed 1990s, when there was a possibility to reintegrate Russia into the global system, into the European security system, and so on. I think there was a situation, I lived it through. It's a two-sided situation. Europe and the US at that time could integrate Russia in principle only as a periphery. Russia has at that time still had the great power mentality. They wanted to be integrated as equals. The historic experience of Central Eastern Europe, of Hungary, Poland, and so on, shows that the Western European center of the European Union can imagine only integrating other countries as peripheries, as subordinates. That is the general concept. And it was not only a political mistake not to integrate Russia. It was a consequence of the general philosophical approach. Whoever wanted to integrate Russia wanted Russia to be integrated as periphery, as subordinate, which was not acceptable even to President Yeltsin, who was the weakest Russian president ever. So that is a bigger structural problem behind it. That's my assessment.
That's a very, very important point. And also the other 2 points that we now have, so that we are losing institutional memory that makes foreign policy and diplomacy weak, and the securitization of diplomacy, which is genuinely, to me, relatively new, because the whole idea of security services is a Cold War concept. I mean, we had the OSS and so on before, also in the Second World War, but the height of spy of the security services was, of course, the Cold War. So coming out of that, did we in Europe actually undermine our capacity of statecraft by handing over decision making, not decision making, but thinking, like state thinking from diplomats to intelligence people? Maybe Jose, do you want to say something about this?
Well, yes, indeed. I would like to say a couple of things. One, you touch raw nerve, Daniel. In fact, this is what happened. In 1975, we created, the West and the East created a very good system of security, the Helsinki Conference. The Tante began conventional forces, etc., arms control, etc. But as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, the United States didn't want the Tante. They wanted to crush Russia. It's a very good book, not 1 inch, Mary Salot. It's clear. I mean, it's a matter of public record. They were discussing what to do with the reunification of Germany. And then Germany and Russia were about to reach an agreement. And then Robert Selig, which would become afterwards the president of the World Bank, phoned Bush father and said, be careful. If they agree, if they reach an agreement, Russia and Germany, NATO is going to be blown. And then Bush father said they have to do it in a different way. And then Germany bought the goodwill of Russia with money. So from day one, we wanted NATO to be the security system of Europe, which is, of course, contrary to the most elementary strategic thinking, because the Soviet Union disappeared and, Russia took over. And Russia was, remember, before the First World War, Russia was one of ours. Russia was a Western country. I mean, absolutist or not absolutist, democratic or not, he was one of us. They decided not to go this way. They decided to keep alive the system of hostility. Why? We will never know. Probably, I don't know. It was a clear case of misunderstanding. They thought that this unipolar moment was going to last forever, and that, they had to conquer Eurasia. And then began the enlargement of NATO, which was a terrible mistake, as everybody knew, all professionals knew it, and eventually war, because Russia said, enough is enough. This is a red line. You know, Pascal, it is self-evident, and I shouldn't, say this because it's elementary, but I have to say it because nobody remembers. A system of security demands the agreement of the two parties. If there is no agreement, then it is not a system of security. It's a diktat. This is what we did with Germany in the days of Versailles. And the United States treated Russia like a defeated country in a war. And that was not the case. And these are all the consequences, there. From this is the original, let's say, the original sin. And another thing, of course, the militarization of the foreign policy is clear. There is even a book written by the guy who who landed the Pulitzer Prize for the Me Too story. I don't remember his name, but he has a book. He was the intern of this famous American diplomat in Yugoslavia. No. In Yugoslavia, there was an ambassador who practically did everything. He was an intern. He wrote a book precisely on this, the militarization of American foreign policy, which I have read. It's in my Kindle, and it's very good. I advise you. Definitely, you know why? Because the Americans are destroying their own diplomatic service, their own talent, their own qualified people. And the only thing that they have able to answer the demands of the power are the military. This is why. Go there, and the military go there. And of course, but they are not diplomats. Probably they don't speak the language of the country, and their means are violent. They are military. And they don't understand what they are doing. They are simply acting in a military way. The result is a complete chaos. I agree completely with Jean-Daniel. He woke a very sensitive point. The idea that the Americans have of hegemony is sending the troops, and it's a terrible mistake, as we are seeing.
Jean-Daniel, do you want to react?
Yes, if
Sorry, let's maybe start with Sandor first and then Jean-Daniel.
Okay. I just want to insert two or three small observations. You mentioned securitization of diplomacy, and Jose mentioned militarization of diplomacy. I want to turn your attention to the fact that it is almost the same. It's the military-industrial complex, which is very strictly or very closely related or connected to the security apparatus. It is in substance the same element. In Russia, we call it the siloviki, the forceful part of the state. It happened in our countries as well, especially in the major powers of Europe and in the US. So that's why the sophisticated professional diplomacy is dying out very fast, because the force came into it and it tries to substitute the professional diplomatic sophistication. Just give you one example. When I was ambassador in China for 6 years, I was always amazed that most of my European colleagues, especially from the embassy of the European Union, so our joint representation, are not able to conduct everyday diplomatic work with the Chinese or with anybody else. They know only one method: démarches. All the time démarches, even not requests or consultations or negotiations or creative discussions how to solve this or that problem. Whatever happened is that the embassy of the European Union went to the Chinese Foreign Ministry or Ministry of Trade and declared demands. And they came back very happily. We issued another démarche. So the diplomatic sophistication disappeared into the sphere of half ultimatums. And if you do that, then you forget or stop listening to the other party. You accept only capitulation. And if that is your approach, it's not diplomacy, it's military. And I saw it degrading from year to year to year. Nowadays, that's why I am not surprised how the European leaders, politicians, make declarative demands to China, to Russia, to India. We are very close to the situation when the European Union will propose secondary sanctions on India. Tariffs and other things like Donald Trump did, which is the only way, the only possible way to lose India fully. And I don't understand it, but in principled way, but I understand the mechanisms, how the professional diplomacy via securitization and militarization changes its character. It loses many hundreds of years of professional sophistication, tactics, so the whole substance of this profession. So I am very sorry that we are losing that, because I became a diplomat for that reason. I wanted to do that. I liked it very much to be a negotiator, a real negotiator, not a démarche provider, but a negotiator. That's a different quality. Thank you very much.
Jean-Daniel.
Thank you very much. Of course, I like very much what I have just heard, because this fits exactly with my observations. There is a lot of substance, and I could react on like 10 points that I have heard, but I would like to limit myself to maybe 2 or 3. And the first one is the weakness of the West is precisely that we do not have an institutional memory when the others do have an institutional memory. And I'm thinking about the Russians and about the Chinese. By the way, I have just been offered a fantastic book about the history of diplomacy in 3 huge volumes, written in 1935 by a guy called Potemkin, who was a Soviet scholar. And it starts with the treaty between the Egyptians and the Hittites in the 13th century before Jesus. And it's absolutely fascinating. And when you see this level of understanding of the world history and how important it continues to be, then you think that already mentally we are weak and we're at a disadvantage against Russia and China. Another major disadvantage we have, of course, I'm a convinced Democrat. The problem is that in democracies, when you have elections every 4 years, or in the case of America every 2 years, you cannot have a long-term planning like you can have in dictatorships like Russia or China. And this is a weakness we don't really know how to overcome. Switzerland is in a little bit better situation because our federal councillors are basically elected for life, and they resign whenever they want. But there is a major in the strategic thinking and in the development of strategies. And it's not only in the field of foreign policy, it's also in the field of infrastructures, energy, urbanization, environment, and so on. Joe Biden develops a big green fund, and then 2 years later, Trump comes and scraps everything. How can you do long-term planning for the development of our societies and preparing for the future like that? There is one more thing. Speaking of institutional memory, indeed, we've forgotten, I think Jose made that point, how much Russia was part of the European system in the 19th century and even before. We do remember that a little bit in Switzerland, that General Suvorov liberated Switzerland from the French. And there is even a beautiful monument on one of our main high passes to the honor of Suvorov. This monument was I would say that painted with graffitis after the Ukraine war. However, the kind of fear of Russia is not new at all, including in the neutral Switzerland. You remember the Crimea War, which was basically a British and French-led war in Crimea in the 1850s to prevent Russia from reaching one day Constantinople or Istanbul. And in 1851, I think, our main newspaper of neutral Switzerland published an article saying Switzerland should send troops to Ukraine, I mean to Crimea, to help the Russian and British and the French and British forces against Russia. It's hard to imagine, but it seems that Russia is a wonderful scapegoat for our military industry and for our security apparatus to receive more funds. And it works. And it works. In our case, our military has just received 40 billion for 10 years, which is a lot for us, to buy all sorts of things. We don't even know what. They receive the money and then they figure out how to spend the money instead of doing it the other way around, which would be correct. I will stop there, but of course I could talk about the Caucasus, about the NATO enlargement, and maybe one more thing, which is for me the major change. And maybe both of you, Sandor and Jose, had the naivety to believe that when we were talking about human rights and international law, we meant it. We meant that this was the old order that the West wanted with international law. I mean, law meaning valid for everybody. And I think we realize today that international law and all the discourse we had on human rights, even on justice. I work for the Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal, and I thought we did something good when we brought Milosevic and the others in prison in The Hague. But realized today that international law was a kind of lawfare or a kind of propaganda tool rather than being the compass that should guide our behaviors.
I just ask you to react in that case, Jose first.
Well, I think there is a contradiction which I would like to point out. One, we say that we want the world is based upon rules. Okay? Yes, we have on our side Saudi Arabia. We have on our side Al-Jolani, which in December was filmed playing football with the heads of the Christians he had just beheaded. Some of them children. We have with us people like Parubi, recently killed in an attempt. But Mr. Parubi was the founder of the National Socialist Party of Ukraine. So how can we say that the rules of public international law are with us? Go to Israel, what they are doing. It's a flagrant contradiction with principles of public international law. They are not fulfilling in any possible way the commandments of the humanitarian laws of war. The fourth, remember, the fourth Geneva Convention. You remember the movies. I want to be treated like according to the rules of the Geneva Convention. Well, there are rules also for the occupying power. Israelis occupying power and belligerent occupier. Therefore, there are rules not respected. But we claim that, law is with us. Well, it's not with us. It's sedimentary. And besides, we are going to destroy the welfare state at the same time, or because we don't have money, but we have 30 billion a year to Ukraine. All because we want Ukraine to be part of NATO. You remember in those days, in the days in which we were discussing whether Russia had the right to say this or not, whether Russia had the right to put an end to the enlargement of NATO, the Solomon Islands had the very bad idea of saying that they might open a Chinese base in the Marshall. The Marshall Islands are 9,000 kilometers away from the Pacific coast of the United States of America. And the United States said, no. At the same time, they had, they said that, of course, Russia had to accept that the NATO in our frontiers, because obviously, Ukraine is 50 kilometers away from the frontier. Will be 50 kilometers away from Russia. It's unbelievable. So it's true that human rights are. It's just rhetoric. I would say it's rhetoric. No, it's not true. After the 5 million displaced people in Afghanistan and the 1 million people destroyed in the Middle East with the Iraq adventure, how can we speak of human rights? Not even hypocrisy, it's I don't know how to define it. I don't know how to define it.
No, it's horribly cynical, but Sandor.
Yes.
If I may insert again an idea. Personally, I was always a realist in international relations, in the concept. So I am not surprised that the human rights and other issues and some basic elements of the international law has been twisted according to the political, ideological, and other needs of the major powers. In the Middle Ages in Europe, there was a very important philosophical or theoretical concept. They told that philosophy is the servant of theology.
Yes.
Today, the international law is the servant of power politics. Just give you one aspect, and I leave out the double standards, the really blatant lies and political manipulations related to human rights, genocide, and other issues. I leave it out. But what I want to tell you, how we twist the international law. In the case of Kosovo, the International Court of Justice in The Hague decided that the right for nations or to self-determination overrides the territorial integrity. In the case of Crimea, everybody decides that, even Ursula von der Leyen and all other leaders, that territorial integrity is absolute. No self-determination can override it. The trick in the international law that both principles, the principle of territorial integrity and the principle of national self-determination, both of them are in the Charter of the United Nations. And it makes it possible for the great powers or for the conceptual politicians to choose between them. Sometimes we choose this one, sometimes we choose that one. And that's why I consider it's very important to understand that when we talk about international law, how much it is undefined and not clear, but it still exists. We try to limit the political or military freedom of action of powers.
Yeah.
That's what in reality it is. So that's why neither the American governments nor the European governments don't talk about international law anymore. They talk about world order based on rules. Rules are not equal, do not equal law. Rules are established by the powerful. The international law in principle shall protect the weak as well. So when we use the terminology, the rules-based international order, in that moment, we introduce or accept the double standards, the selective implication of law. So that's the basic problem. And I understand fully that for even the most professional, the best professional, the most clever diplomats have very big difficulty to navigate in these circumstances, to implement their country's interest in these circumstances, because they do not know in any moment which part of the international law is applicable to that situation. That's a real big challenge.
And it is another fantastic ambassador who made that point, Ambassador Chas Freeman of the United States, who made the observation, rules-based international order is rule by law. The aspiration of international law is the rule of law, equal for everybody. Rule by law is you pick and choose and then you make everybody else follow. But Jean-Daniel, I let you respond and then we go to one final round of questions.
Yes, I would just like to respond on that. There is one embarrassing aspect for the West that we created in the 19, and it is the International Criminal Court. Embarrassing for the West today because the International Criminal Court, which is largely independent, and we really have to salute, I believe, the courage of some of these prosecutors and judges. In the case of Putin, you may discuss. In the case of Netanyahu and Gallant and plus the Hamas leaders, what they have done, in my view, is a real show of independence and of courage, because they knew that they would have to face smear campaigns, as we have seen with Karim Khan, and even financial and visa sanctions for them and their families, as we have seen also. And now maybe the ICC is the last remnant, which is more or less working, of the international order that had been imagined by the Western powers after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Of course, the Americans never wanted to join, but it was sort of the cornerstone, a very important part for the Europeans of their soft power, of their vision of the world order. And it's still alive. It's still alive. How long, how much pressure there is on Germany to stop the funding or to restrain the funding, these are questions which will occupy us in the future. But I think we should not underestimate the fact that this still exists, and it needs to be cherished, especially by the Europeans.
Institution building. And Jose, and then Sandor, and again Jean-Daniel, I'll let you respond to what you've heard again the way you want, but one more question. If you were advising not your own government, but if you were advising the global South, including Southeast Asia, including China and Russia, including Africa and South America, if you were advising them, how would you tell them how to deal with contemporary Europe on a diplomatic level, like considering the constraints that we just outlined, like the securitization of foreign policy, the militarization of it, and the loss of institutional memory? What would be your advice of how to build with such incapacitated entity at this part of Eurasia? Jose first.
Well, Pascal, this is utopian, you know. Diplomats do not deal with utopia, you know.
But they have to you have to, the Chinese and Southeast Asians, they somehow have to approach the Europeans, right? You somehow have to deal with them. So how do you deal with them?
But to begin with, we are not a single country. That's the problem. We thought that, we are 450 million people. We have a lot of money. Our GDP is very high. Therefore, we are something. Well, you are not absolutely anything. If you are not sovereign, if there is not a single entity to say yes or no, so as, Kissinger put it, where is the telephone? Where is the telephone? I mean, Euro doesn't have a telephone number. He was absolutely right. Here, if you want to go to the very, very beginning of everything, is that the idea of the United States concerning their own hegemony the world over is obsolete. That's it. That's it. They don't have the means to keep things, the way they are. And they do not want to accept it because they do not have a replacement. And then what can we do? I mean, how can we go to Washington and tell them, your system is obsolete? Let's do something else. Let's do something like you did in 45. That was your golden minute. That was your time of, you were so strong in those years. You could do anything you wanted. When the war began, they had only one foreign military base outside the United States, Guantanamo, and an army of 50,000 people. When the war finished, they had bases all over the world and 10 million soldiers. That's, that was the moment of truth. No, this is not the case. They don't have the money. They are debasing the dollar because they cannot pay the debt. And they don't know what to do. They want us to pay for them. They want us to sustain. They want us, Europeans, to sustain a system which is unsustainable. And we are not even able, to provide Ukraine with ammunition, which is unbelievable, We spend 20 times the amount of money that Russia spends. We don't even have artillery ammunition. It's unbelievable. Now, you have to go to Washington and tell them, let's do something like you did in 45. Let's, create a new system. But, which country is doing this? China, from an alternative point of view. That's the area. So, yes, in a theoretical world, we could go to our top brass and say, okay, guys, the answer is China. Let's find a compromise. Or, the United States are in the path of war, because this system is driving us to war. Look at what happened in Ukraine. This is only the beginning, Can go, the situation can deteriorate very, very much. This is only the beginning. Who would pay attention to what we said? Nobody. And we would need a European voice united, which we do not have. And I agree absolutely with Kusai, with Sandor, which we can see that he has a very good intellectual training. He remembers that philosophy is the anphila theology, yes, it's the servant of theology, and he's absolutely right. Power politics driven by people who do not know very much about politics, because the ideas of the Rat Corporation concerning world affairs and hegemony of the United States are over. They would like to have it this way. It's not possible. And, go to a big transatlantic and try to move it, try to change course. Very, very difficult. It was moved very, very slowly, and there, besides, there are a lot of billions at stake, a lot of billions. Keeping this alive means the sustenance of many, many families and many rat corporations and many think tanks and the like. It's very difficult.
It's a large tanker, and it's on the way.
Yeah. So please do not advise us to do it, because there is a character, in literature. It's called Don Quixote. This sound. You remember that, he wanted to be, the champion of good and the champion of justice. Look what happened at the end, There's this has to be understood by the United States themselves. They have to choose a leader or a party, the Democrats, I think, in this case, and they should change course. They should understand, because they have, the most impressive army of clever people on strategy and international relations. They are the best, and the most, and they outnumber everybody with their numbers. It's incredible what they have, and it serves nothing, because they're unable to see the solution to the problem. They continue to be dominated, ruled by a military thinking, which is not the answer to the problem. We need institutions, we need professional diplomats, we need experts, and not power, not the military. It's absurd.
Sandor, if you want to react.
I want to react first and have a dissenting opinion, like in court, with Jean Daniel's position on ICC. I don't see ICC as an independent organization. First of all, the real great powers are not members, so it's a lion without teeth. Every single judgment was about African, Balkan dictators. There was no judgment about Dutch peacekeepers in Kosovo. There was no judgment about any British general who authorized bombing Afghan villages, and so on. So it's also a double standard there. So in that case, I don't share this optimism. I think that the ICC is part of the international institutional structures which must be fundamentally reformed or kicked out. Hungary is in the legal process now of leaving the ICC. Our parliament approved it. There is a 6-month process until it becomes finally legal. Hungary is leaving the ICC. I fully agree with that. Secondly, going back to your question, thanks God, the countries of the global south do not ask us to give them advice. They have their own professional diplomats who manage their things very well, by the way. But if they asked me, I would give them a very simple advice. Be transactional. Very transactional. So if you make a trade deal or a diplomatic deal, political deal, whatever, with the Western countries, especially with Europe, do it step by step. And the next step you take only if the other side fulfilled 100% its obligations. The whole recent diplomatic history is full of unkept promises, unkept offers. From the climate change, if you look at Europe promised investments, technologies, none was kept. No promise was kept. So if I were a global south country, I would stand up for the reform of the institutions of the world order first, and on practical matters, trade, technology, investment, war, peace and war, everything, I would be utmost transactional. I would have the deals, the diplomatic agreements on step-by-step basis, and I would move further in any diplomatic negotiations only and only after the other side performed what it promised. Not for empty words. Reality. Only reality. That would be my advice in the principle, but I don't think they need our advice. As I saw it in Tianjin with the SEO summit, or as we saw with the BRICS summit and so on, with these negotiations and and documents what they issue, just in brackets. Nobody reads the documents in diplomacy. Even analysts or diplomats. In the Tianjin Declaration of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, it's a 22 pages document. I am not sure that anybody in our European foreign ministries or in Brussels, in the apparatus of Kaja Kalas, our favorite high-level diplomat, they read it. And that's the problem. We shall read it. Again, professionalism. You read the political documents, you analyze it, not the media reports. No. You shall read the original. I demanded from my students in the university to read the primary sources, not the rent cooperation analysis, but the real text, and make your own conclusions. That's how it should work, but it does not work that way anymore. But in general, I don't think they need our advice. My advice would be even more transactional than Donald Trump.
And thank you. And I didn't ask the question to say like they need advice. It's a thinking exercise of what could be. I mean, what would be an approach, right, to approach Europe today? And the last word, and feel free to also to react to something else, goes to Jean-Daniel.
Thank you very much. I would like to make 2 points. Well, first, thank you for the dissenting opinion. I would wish really very much to have a larger debate and longer debate about that, because we really don't agree, and that there would be a lot of substance for a nice match.
Yes.
But that would be for another time. The first thing I would advise anybody who has to deal with not just Europeans, but with the Western world, to study Greek mythology. Because I think the best way to understand the psychology of our leaders is the concept of hubris. Now, I will not enter into more detail, but hubris was a Greek goddess of sort of chaos, self-esteem, overreaching. And we have seen since the Second World War that this kind of hubris has animated the Western policies throughout the world, and is still continuing today. By the way, it led to almost each and every military engagement of the West ending in a disaster, from Korea, Vietnam, all the way to Afghanistan. So they keep losing wars, but they keep the kind of hubris. Well, there are some exceptions. Kosovo is maybe a disputed case where it was a success of the West or not. But don't forget Grenada and Panama, which were resounding victories of the great American military power. And the latest, in my view, manifestation of this incredible hubris is the Trump-Netanyahu plan for Gaza. I don't know if you have read this 38 pages amazing plan, which is like, we are going to do something wonderful, Dubai on the Mediterranean. You Palestinians, you may be part of it, but may not, doesn't really matter, we decide. And that reminds me very much on the way America pushed the indigenous population of America away to create the great American continent. This is exactly the same kind of mentality. And I would summarize all that with the concept hubris. We can impose our grandiose vision, and it's a grandiose vision, on other people without really caring about their tradition, about their history, about thousands of years of presence there. The second thing I would like to say to not just Southeast Asian, but I think it's really to everybody, which is sort of caught between the Chinese and the Americans, is let's try to build something among all the states who do not want to choose, who do not want to be put in a position where they should choose. You're either for China or either for United States. You're either with us or against us, which is pretty much the mentality in Washington those days. And what I would like to tell them is, well, maybe we will move one day to a bipolar world where the Americans and the Chinese will find some understanding. We know that there are trade talks which are taking place between Beijing and Washington now. Let's hope they reach to even more global understanding than only on trade. But everybody, probably you have noticed that when Washington published its list of new trade tariffs on the 1st of August, there was one missing country in the list, China, because the talks are continuing, and we'll see what happened. Now, I think we all have an interest, and Switzerland is certainly interested in that, because we have a free trade agreement with China. We have been hit by one of the largest, certainly the largest trade tariffs for any industrial country, 39%. I think in the Western world, I think maybe Serbia is doing a little bit more, but not many, not others. And what I would wish is that there is a kind of coalition of those who do not want to choose, that could start to make an alliance and a kind of network, so as to push their interests in a transactional manner. Of course, it's all about discussions and trade deals.
Jean-Daniel, the coalition of the unwilling is something that needs to be built, and it's really
this is good. Yes,
and it's a great way to kind of fix a talk on a channel called Neutrality Studies, the coalition of the unwilling to build the world that the others are not willing to build.
Congratulations, Pascal. Very, very lovely idea. But I think the BRIC are trying to fulfill this role, BRICS.
Yes, and that's why we need another hour to discuss that. But I want to bring you back together again in the near future, so that we can expand also on the hopeful vision of the future, which I do think is the BRICS. I need to wrap it up for tonight. Jean-Daniel Ruch, José Zorilla, and Sandor Kusai, thank you very much for your time today.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks to all.
Good day.